Brazil, and we all work together with the aim to promote this issue, to raise awareness about human rights in Israel-Palestine, engage students specifically, but other people, of course, as well. Everyone, we need more voices on this issue. And FFIPP Europe is now, we're hosting a speaking tour, to which this is the last event. Jeff and Rania have been visiting, giving talks in Paris, Bordeaux, and Grenoble, and so this is their final day of the speaking tour, so we are very happy to welcome them here. They will talk about the one-state solution, to which I'll let you talk more about that issue. But we have Jeff Halper. He is an author, activist, and lecturer, co-founder of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, as well as the co-founder of the People Yes Network. And in 2006, Jeff was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his work to build equality between Palestinians and Israelis by recognizing and celebrating their common humanity. And we also welcome Rania Madi. She is the UN Legal Advocacy Representative for Badil, which is the Resource Center for Palestinian Residency and Refugee Rights. Rania also does consultancy for Palestinian refugees and internally displaced persons. Rania works also a great deal with the Human Rights Council in Geneva and organizes panels and events on this issue. And in 2016, Rania was the one who submitted Badil's report of investigations after the Gaza war in 2014 to the ICC in The Hague. So we're very honored to have them here to talk about this issue. And yeah, without further ado, I'll have Jeff begin and talk more.
Good to be here. Thanks for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. You should all be napping, but maybe some of you will. Yeah, my name is Jeff Halper. I'm the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, ICAD. That's a political group in Israel that's dedicated to achieving a just peace between Palestinians and Israelis. We focus on the issue of house demolitions in order to like a vehicle, in order to provide a window for people to understand how the occupation works, what Israel's intentions are, of course the human cost of occupation, but we're much bigger than that, not in numbers necessarily, but in political aspirations, and that is to try to really resolve this whole issue of Israel and Palestine. So we've been active for more than 20 years. We set up ICAD in 1997 when it was clear that the Oslo peace process was in a state of collapse. Now, we've done a lot of work over the years about house demolitions, about the occupation itself. I've written a number of books. I've gone all over the world speaking. I've spoken here many times in Amsterdam. Last year I was in Asheville, North Carolina, speaking at the public library. And I finished a talk, not about this, about a book I wrote, War Against the People, about how Israel exports the occupation. And a fellow got up at the end of my talk and he says to me, he said, I've been listening to you for 20 years now. To your credit, Jeff, you varied your presentation. So thank you for that. It's not the same thing for 20 years. But he said, I get it already. I get it. Occupation, Palestinians, house demolitions, Israel. What do you want? What do you want? If I go to my member of Congress and he or she asks me, what do you guys want? What's my answer? And that's really the fatal flaw, or the fatal lack until now, of our political work. We've reached, in a sense, a ceiling. Because you know, activism has to be connected to a political end game. Activism by itself, I mean, I can always build another house, I can always write another book, we can always do another demonstration, but to what end? Why are we BDSing? You know, we're in a transitional period. The two-state solution that some people still hang on to, although probably by next week, when Trump's plan is announced, that'll be the final nail in that coffin. But you know, some people hold on, but the two-state solution really ended 20 years ago. And so for the last 20 years, with all our activism on the ground and advocacy, we haven't been able to present an end game. We, and by we I mean the stakeholders, led by Palestinians. Palestinians have to be the ones that formulate and articulate where we're going in this whole mess. What do they want? It's really their struggle in many ways. Supported by critical Israelis like us, and then supported by the international civil society, which is you guys. Today the pyramid is sort of inverted. In other words, most of the activism comes from abroad. Whether it's the BDS movement, or FFIPP, or different Jewish voices, or in the US, Jewish Voice for Peace, or the US Campaign Against the Occupation, or Palestine Solidarity Committee in campaign in the UK. I mean, all over the world, Palestine, in my view, has become a global issue at the level of the anti-apartheid struggle. But it's led primarily by internationals. Well, you're not going to liberate Palestine from Amsterdam. You know? We have to follow the lead of the Palestinians. And here there's a real difficulty. Because the Palestinians, in my view, I mean, Rania is here, so you have from the horse's mouth, you might say, you don't have to believe me, but from my experience, you know, the Palestinians are fragmented. They've been fragmented, I mean, by outside forces, as well as internal forces. They're exhausted. Most Palestinians are just surviving, trying to get by. They are resisting. We have the March of Gaza now for more than a year and a half. But they're unable, in a way, until now at least, to really formulate a political program. There's all kinds of obstacles in the way. Partly the fact that, you know, most people are barely surviving and don't have the mental space to go think about political philosophy. Partly it's a matter of, to be honest, I wrote about this on Facebook yesterday, the intellectuals and academics and professional people in the Palestinian world are largely missing in action. You know, leaving the struggle kind of to the average people on the ground that can't really package a political program. The PA is on their head. I mean, they're living under two occupations, Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And maybe most difficult of all is that, you know, in our attempt to try to bring the one-state political program to the Palestinian people, is the reaction that we get that, you know, we have no problem with the one-state solution. I mean, that was the PLO's position 50 years ago. So Palestinians say we have no problem with the one-state solution, but we don't believe it's possible. We don't believe we can beat Israel and the U.S. and Europe, and you know, so it's better just to kind of hunker down, survive, get out if we can, and get on with our lives. So that's been a real issue, because you can't be in a political struggle without an end game. So that over the last couple years, a number of us, Palestinians, interestingly enough, mainly 48 Palestinians, Palestinian citizens of Israel, who aren't under so much occupation and pressures, and who are freer to organize and speak out, but who have never been super involved in the occupation, having their own civil liberty issues inside Israel, have decided, especially with the deterioration that's taking place under Netanyahu's governments, that now is the time that really there has to be a united addressing of the Palestinian issue. So that there's a group of Palestinians, we're a group of maybe 50, largely connected to the Balad Party, which is the Arab nationalist party in Israel, but with academics and intellectuals. And there are Palestinians from the territories and from the diaspora involved as well. We have that has formulated a political program, a 10-point political program. We have on the back of this program, I have a couple copies here, about 140 people. Now there's been several hundred that have endorsed it. Palestinians primarily, with some Israelis. So that, we have a program that I'll talk about in a second that I think is very good. And so now our job is to get the Palestinians to buy in, because again, without the Palestinians, we're stuck. And then to go to the international community and all of you guys and really begin a campaign for a one democratic state. Now, one of the things when you talk about a political program, this isn't just a list of 10 things. This isn't that we sat down, everybody had an idea and said, let's put this in, let's put that in. But there's a political logic to it that I think is important to understand, but it's important for us in our advocacy as well. And one of the problems we're facing is that we've misanalyzed this situation all these years. And we're using the wrong terms. So, we see this as a conflict. We talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict, or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But it's not a conflict. I mean, a conflict assumes two sides, at least, right, that disagree about something, and they have a fight. And the way you resolve the conflict is you put them together, and they compromise, and they negotiate, and they come up with some kind of a solution. But there's no two sides here. Zionism, and this is really the basic issue we've got to get across to people. It has to be the basis of our analysis. Zionism was and is a settler colonial movement. It's a national movement. I'm not saying by this that Jews don't have any linkage to that country, or that, it's like the French that went to Algeria, or the British that went to Kenya. You can make a case that there's a genuine core and kernel of connection between the Jewish people in that country. But what Zionism did, even if you want to call it a national movement, was it took settler colonialism as the form of its nationalism, as the form of its way of taking over the country. And in that sense, it conforms, almost in a classic textbook way, to the way settler colonialism works in other parts of the world, whether it's the United States or Canada or Australia or New Zealand or South Africa or Algeria or wherever, Latin America during the time of the Spanish and the Portuguese. And that is, it's unilateral. Settlers, unlike classical colonialism that you guys were pretty good at, not as good as the British, but you did not badly. The idea of settler colonialism is that you're coming to take over the country. You're not coming simply to extract the resources or to exploit the country. You're coming to take it over. And the Zionist movement was very upfront about that from the very beginning. And if there's one term that I could leave you with today that kind of captures the whole thrust of Zionism until today with Israeli government policies, it would be the term Judaization. It's not a term we use very often. Matter of fact, non-Jews aren't very comfortable with it because it has this vague sense of being anti-Semitic. But it's a term that's been used by the Zionist movement and by Israel for the last 125 years. Officially, our policy is to Judaize the Galilee. We're Judaizing Jerusalem. So writ large, overall, the overall goal of Zionism was to Judaize Palestine. And they were very clear about it. I can bring you 1,000 quotes from 1,000 different people. In other words, the idea is to transform Palestine into the land of Israel. To transform an Arab country into a Jewish country. And the whole country, from the Mediterranean at least to the Jordan River. You know, the right-wing Zionists like Begin and Jabotinsky claimed the other side of the Jordan River as well. That's what they considered the eastern part of the land of Israel. So we've already compromised by only wanting the western part to the Jordan River. But the idea was to take that over, not to take over 78%. There's no green line in Zionist settler colonial ideology, but to take over the country. And you do it in a unilateral way so that the natives, the indigenous population, aren't a side. They have no standing. They're not a people, they're not a nation, they have no national rights, you don't negotiate with them. What you do with them is you displace them, or you confine them to little islands like Gaza, or areas A and B, or you eliminate them, which is what a lot of settler colonial societies did. And again, you know, the idea is that this is unilateral, so that every settler colonial movement invents a story, a narrative, about why the land belongs to them exclusively. Why the settlers have an entitlement to the land over that of the native population. It often has to do with God. God is a great vehicle for that. Whether it's, you know, just last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, the Israeli ambassador to the UN held up the Bible in the Security Council and said, this is our deed to the country. You know, so we have a joke in Israel. Even Jews that aren't religious say God gave us that land. You know, and God was certainly a part of the South African colonial experience, and the American with Manifest Destiny. The French preferred civilization. But nevertheless, every settler colonial movement then makes up a story about why the land in fact they have the right to the land. And in that story, again, the indigenous population plays no role. If you read the Zionist ideologies and the Zionist story, there's no Arabs in it. It was a self-contained story made up in Europe. We didn't even know they were Arabs. So the famous line of Zionism, it's a country without a people, didn't mean that they sort of didn't know, they sort of knew they were Arabs there, obviously. At least camels, and there's camels, there's probably Arabs. But the Arabs didn't add up to a people, to a collective, to a nation with national rights that we had to recognize and deal with. So that was the thrust. Now that's really important as I mean, between that and the idea of a conflict is important, because a conflict leads you to the two-state idea. You know, you partition the country, there's two sides, there's two peoples. You know, the famous slogan of the Israeli left, 2 states for 2 peoples. You know, that's even reflected in the BDS movement. You know, in BDS, one of the elements is end the occupation here. Another element is equal rights for Palestinian citizens of Israel there. It's the same binary. So that adopting a settler colonial paradigm or analysis brings the whole thing, it leads you almost, it leads you logically to the idea of one state, because the only way you end settler colonialism is through decolonization. And the only way you end decolonization is by creating a new civil society that includes everybody. I mean, either the settlers leave, like in Algeria, but that's not going to happen in our case. So you have to create a space, a new civil society, in which everyone has equal rights. And then, if that happens, then the indigenous have the option, as a sovereign agent, of saying to the settlers, okay, we, under these circumstances of equality and restructuring and decolonization, we're willing to accept you in this country. We're willing to say the settler colonial phase has ended and now we want to normalize relations. And in a way, that's the only way settlers can ever become natives. You see? So there's a logic, there's a political logic to it that's very compelling. So in the one state, so when you finally get to the one state idea, and the elements that sort of emerge out of that analysis, it holds together. It makes sense. But you've got to provide, and that's one of the problems, that's why I'm talking so long, is that you've got to provide that political logic to it. Otherwise, one state just, it drops out of the blue and people say, what? And what about Jews? And what about this one? Well, you can answer all those issues if you have that right comprehensive logic. There's 10 points to our plan. I'm not going to go through them all, I promise. But just 3 or so I want to just mention because I think they're the most important. And in a way, when you hear them, or when you read them, you say, that's it? I mean, they're simple, they're not brilliant, and you say, well, it took 100 years, or 70 years, or 50 years to figure these things out. And the point is, they're simple and they make sense if they're put in that context of that language. But if you're coming from a conflict and 2 states and occupation, you don't get there. And by the way, one of the issues is here that we would say that there is no such thing as occupation. Even that term is wrong because it's, again, locking us into a conflict. There is an occupation in terms of international law. It's clear. There is an occupation, and the International Court of Justice in The Hague has said that very clearly, especially in the Wall case of 2004. But nevertheless, we had this discussion before, international law plays no role in international politics. And so if we're really looking at the real political dynamics of this conflict, we have to look at Israel that calls the shots, and at Zionism and that whole political logic. And from the point of view of the facts on the ground and the Israeli policy and the support that Israel gets, there is no occupation. Because again, Zionism claims the entire country. Israel has never, ever, ever, until this day, admitted that there's an occupation. Israel does not apply the Fourth Geneva Convention. Israel is a signatory to the Fourth Geneva Convention that governs the way occupying powers treat what are called protected peoples. And the Supreme Court has upheld that. But the Israeli Supreme Court, like the government, says it just doesn't apply because there's no occupation. How can you occupy your own country? You see? So that by, in a sense, by using the word occupation, we're again locking ourselves into a conflict, 2-state kind of a paradigm. So I'm in favor of not using the word occupation at all, and just talking about settler colonialism. The fact that not only did Israel eliminate the 2-state solution, there never was a 2-state solution which is clear in the works, but that today there already is a single state. I mean, Zionism has already succeeded. It's over. Between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, there's only one state today, de facto, functional. There's only, you can't get into that country, as many of you know, from any direction without going through Israeli border controls. There's one effective government. And don't tell me it's the Palestinian Authority. There's one army, obviously. There's one currency. There's one infrastructure. water system, electrical system, highway system. In other words, by any measure, one legal system, by any measure of what a state is, there already is one functioning state between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, but it's an apartheid state. It's an apartheid state because it conforms exactly to the idea of apartheid. Apartheid means you have a country with one governing authority that has different legal systems for different populations. So in Israel, you've got three, at least. You've got one legal system for people like me, who are Israeli Jewish citizens. You've got one legal system for Israeli citizens who are not Jewish, who live under a completely different system, who are excluded from 94% of the land of the country by law. And you have a third legal system for non-Jewish, non-citizens of Israel, the Palestinians of the occupied territories. That's apartheid. So, in a way, the solution is almost mathematical. If the two-state solution never was, or if you really think it was possible, it's obviously gone, eliminated by Israel. And the one-state solution that already exists, the one state, that's an apartheid state, is unacceptable, I hope. The only way to decolonization, then, is to transform that one state that Israel has already created. So you can't blame the Arabs. The reframing is very important. Israel is the operative agent here. Israel has decided these things because, of course, the way Israel gets away with it is by casting itself as the victim. And that dovetails with Jews, who are the ultimate victims, right? And so Israel, can do everything it does, but not be held accountable because we're the victim. In other words, to be the victim is a very powerful place to be politically, because you can't be held accountable if you're the victim. So that reframing is important. So what we have to say is that Israel eliminated the two-state solution. Israel created one state. And therefore, our job is to, in a way, go with the flow. That Israel created. All right, we have to say, okay, Israel, fine. You created one state. We accept that. Now, you can't accept that it's an apartheid state, of course. So our job is to transform that one apartheid state that you, Israel, created into a democratic state of equal rights for all its citizens. Presented that way, I think it's compelling. I don't see an argument to that. And I don't see how Israel could argue against that. So but the issue then remains, well, how would this work? All right, it's a great idea, it's just, it makes sense, but how in the hell would it work? And that's part of our job. So in our 10-point program, let me just mention a couple of the points. First of all, we're talking about a constitutional democracy. It's a constitution. Israel is the only country in the world, except Britain, that has a Magna Carta. It's the only country in the world that doesn't have a constitution. And that's why it can create all these crazy laws. Now what's going to happen, by the way, to make it even worse in Israel, in the next month or two, as soon as Netanyahu has his government in place, is they're going to, maybe in the next week or two, they're going to pass a law that neutralizes the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will not be able to contradict a law passed by the Parliament. So, and the Parliament, 85% of the laws passed by the Israeli Parliament are laws suggested by the Prime Minister's office. So it's basically going to be Erdogan. It's going to be like Turkey. It's going to be kind of a one-state, a one-person rule in Israel. At any rate, that's because you don't have a constitution. So we have a constitution, a constitutional democracy, in which you have equal individual rights for everyone. Equal rights for every citizen. So the revolution in our approach, even though it's not a revolution in a European sense, but the revolution in our approach is to shift from a country being based on an ethno-national religious basis of separate groups to a country based on one body of citizens. Citizenship, which is a concept that's foreign to Israel, but that you have here in Europe, of course. So it should make sense to Europeans. So individual rights, one citizenship, one parliament, one legal system, that's the basis of the state. Now, go argue against that. You know, that makes sense. A second element is the right of return. The right of return is absolute. But it also makes sense, again, from within this paradigm. Because refugees have a right to return home. That's clear. But refugees are also a part of your citizenry. If you take the idea of citizens and a citizenry, you know, of your country, just because you fled your country, especially in conflict, or because you were driven out of your country, doesn't mean you've lost your civil status, you and your descendants. So in a sense, bringing the refugees home is the ingathering of our citizens. I mean, it flows automatically from the concept of a citizen. Now we want to bring our citizens home, whoever wants to come home. And that's why, so in addition to being a right, it's not only a right, it makes sense that the refugees should come back, because there are citizens that have been forced out of the country for the last 70 years. The third piece is the guaranteeing of collective rights. Now, we decided in the very beginning that we're going to, and this is why it took us so long, we're going to formulate a program that we can genuinely take into the political arena. Now, as a leftist, like some of you, I could in 5 minutes sit down and write up a manifesto that with all our language, our lingo, our language, our jargon, a manifesto that the left wing would love. But it would just simply be a dead letter because you know, it doesn't, sometimes on the left we don't care. Because we don't believe, I think, that we can really influence policy. So we put out these manifestos with all this language, and we don't care if it's acceptable, if it's sellable, if it's marketable, if it gets into the public. We just do it, you know, and then we forget about it usually. So we decided we wanted a program we could genuinely bring forth into the political arena. So the idea of collective rights is a part of that. The first question that pops up, and it pops up even in audiences of Palestinians sometimes, is, well, what's going to happen to the Jews in this state? The Jews are going to be the minority. There will be a Palestinian majority. There already is a Palestinian majority in the country before the return of refugees. So what's going to prevent this from being Algeria? Which is what Israelis ask is, what's going to prevent the Palestinian majority from doing to us in parliament what we do to them today? I mean, Israel is a perfect example of a democracy in which you have the tyranny of the majority. I mean, you know, Israelis aren't stupid. Why can't the Palestinians do the same thing? So we have to address that fear, of course, that concern. And the idea of collective rights does that. And it basically says you have a right within a multicultural democracy, equal individual rights. You have a right to your identity and your narrative and your institutions. So you can continue to speak Hebrew or Arabic or whatever. Nobody's going to close the Hebrew University. Haaretz newspaper will continue to appear. There'll be a Hebrew literature. And also the Palestinian, of course. The Palestinian, you know, their national culture will also thrive. And there's other groups in the country. I won't get into this. There's African asylum seekers, you know, that are beginning to be a major population of the country. There's about 150 to 200,000 Russians living in Israel who are citizens who aren't Jewish. It's more multicultural than we think. And simply the idea is, without any separation, no group gets special privileges, there's no basis of domination anywhere, everyone is equal as an individual citizen. Within that, you have the right to your identity, your collective identities. Just, it's like Holland. I mean, it's here you don't have to say that, because it sort of is the way that your society developed. In our part of the world, we have to say it because of all the distrust and this shift from ethno-national. You see, ethno-national religious is in a way more secure, because your ethnic national religious group is built into the government. And if you're an Israeli, of course, it's a dominant, it's not equal. There's one that dominates the others. So that shifting to a citizenship brings up that issue of security. And so basically what we're saying here is that Parliament will not have the authority to pass any laws to discriminate against any community. And that's it. It's a safety net for Israelis and others. Now you can relax. Nobody's going to throw you out. Nobody's going to stop you from speaking your language or going to your church or synagogue or mosque. It's okay. Finally, the last point that I'll mention is that I touched on before. Okay, we've dismantled the structures of domination and the structures of separation. What's going to replace it? And so our vision is a new civil society, as I said, which is the only way to really decolonize. A new civil society will emerge. We'll be living together. Literally. We'll have civil marriage that we don't have today. People will live together, they'll go to school together, they'll work together. You don't have to. If you're an ultra-Orthodox Jew and you want to go live in your closed community, you can do that. Nobody's gonna, but within the framework of that kind of so that in the beginning, maybe only younger people, maybe more secular people, maybe more middle-class people will actually be the nucleus of this civil society. But over 2, 3, 4 generations, it'll grow. And we don't even have a name for the country yet. The name has to emerge. The name of the country will emerge with the new civil society, the new identity. And I'll stop at this one. Just give you one example. Rania knows when I give this example at the end of my piece. It's a cute example of nation building, how this could work. It's cute, but I think it really says something. And that is that in the FIFA standings in football, do you know the Palestinian national football team is ranked higher than the Israeli national football team? Now, neither country has been able to get into the World Cup. And you guys know how important that is, to be in the World Cup. So can you imagine in this new society we have, this new country, that we're strong enough together to break into the World Cup? Especially since we're not going to be playing in Europe. We're playing in the Middle East, which might help. Can you imagine this joint team, playing in the world? We're all rooting for our team, our side, with all the symbolism and all that. That's the kind of nation-building, shared living experience that builds the country. Not so much ideology or whatever. So that if you can release that natural way of sharing and developing shared experiences, you can genuinely create a new society. So you have in our plan all the protections, all the rights, all the level playing field, and all the possibilities of genuinely a working single state that would really decolonize the situation. So I'll leave it at that.